Welcome to the very first episode of the Catholic Rural Life Podcast. I'm Zach Weezy, and I'm excited to explore with you what it means to live and share the Catholic faith in rural America. For each episode, we're going to go through and hear from those who are living out their faith in small towns, farming communities, and rural parishes, as well as from experts who can offer insights into the unique challenges and opportunities facing rural Catholics today. Today, for our very first episode, we're diving right into the topic of rural evangelization. How can we share the gospel in communities that are often spread out? What unique gifts do rural parishes bring to the larger church? Today, I'm being joined by Dr. Susan Windley-Daoust, an expert in rural evangelization, who will help us unpack these questions and more. Dr. Susan Windley-Daoust was formerly a professor and chair of theology at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. After the decision to leave teaching, she became the director of missionary discipleship for her home diocese, the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, where she worked with pastors, staffs, and councils to help them discern how to become evangelizing parishes. She has since founded the Mark 519 project, which supports Christians accepting the Lord's call in Mark 519. Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. So, Dr. Susan Windley-Daoust, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Zach.
The topic for today is evangelization, and specifically in a rural context. But I do want to start off by asking you, what is evangelization? Because some people probably view it as a diocesan top-down program, and some people might think that it's just having a friend over. So how would you define evangelization?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because it's really misunderstood just across the board by so many people. When we talk about evangelization, it's like we're really going back to the root of the word, the Greek, right? Evangel means message, right? You see the word angel in there. An angel is a messenger. So evangelization is simply the sharing of the Christian message, right? That's all that it is. You don't need to be thinking of the person who's on the corner who's actually shouting at people is kind of like you're going to go to hell. It's like that's not evangelization, that's spiritual harassment, right? Evangelization is any kind of conversation or friendship or initiative that really seeks to offer the message that Jesus Christ is Lord, particularly to people who have not heard it before. I mean, that's the traditional understanding of evangelization. When John Paul II introduced this phrase, the new evangelization, he put the focus a little bit more on drawing back people who have left the Catholic faith, especially in the Western world. So it can mean both of these things. But in the end, evangelization traditionally has meant sharing the Christian faith with somebody who is unfamiliar with it, and particularly introducing that person to Jesus Christ as the Son of God, right? Lots of people have head knowledge of the Christian faith. I mean, even people who know very little about it think they know things about it, they've heard things about it, but they haven't met the Lord, right? In the fullness of that meeting. And that's what evangelization, I would argue, really needs to strive to do. And it's like we don't need Christians who get their Christianity from a book. We need Christians who are in a deep love relationship with Jesus Christ, and then maybe turn to those books to help understand the one that they love even better.
How did you get into what I will call the evangelization business? I know you were a professor for a couple of years and then you had a diocesan role, and now you're starting the 519 project. So, when did you hear a call for that vocation? What was it like? What kind of came at you to be like, this is what I need to be doing?
Okay. You got some time because it's a story. He said it's like you did the college professor thing for a couple of years. It was like 22. So I was a college professor for 22 years in theology at University of St. Thomas and St. Mary's University in Minnesota. And most of that time was at St. Mary's. And when I began at St. Mary's, I offered a assignment to all of my general education students that was basically create your own spiritual autobiography. And so that meant that over, wow, I guess about 15 years in a row, I read papers and papers and papers of 18, 19, 20-year-olds telling me how they understood God acting in their lives or not, right? Um, It was a really meaningful experience to be on the receiving end of that, and they told me repeatedly they found it to, be a really meaningful experience to try to articulate that. Because most people, they kept saying, in fact, it's like, "Nobody's asked me to try to say this out loud before," right? So they really liked the assignment a lot, even if they weren't especially religious. Sometimes, especially if they weren't religious, they loved the challenge of it. But what I noticed over the time from when I began assigning that to about 10 years later, so from about 2002 until 2012, that the tenor of this, what people were reporting, really, really changed quite a bit. St. Mary's is a school that when I started was the student population was self identifying. Um, as Catholic at about a 60% rate. So a majority of the students identified as Catholic, and probably another 30% of the students identified as Christian. Okay. They were a Protestant, usually of some sort or another. So I got lots of papers that matched that self identification. But about 10 years later, I'm noticing it's like I have more and more and more students who are just not um, identifying with any religious tradition whatsoever. They may have grown up in one, but they didn't really identify it with it as Catholic, as Lutheran, as really anything at that point. And it just continued to grow. And of course, it was the rise of the nuns in real time. But as far as I know, nobody was using that language yet. Wasn't hearing anything about it other than reading these papers. And so when I got to be around 2017, I was reading these papers again, and I came across like 10 papers in a row where I had students who were clearly struggling in lots of ways. I mean, they were very upfront about their own personal struggles in life and their woundedness, but just did not see Jesus Christ as any part of the solution or even a conversation partner for these real troubles that they were trying to carry on their own. They were identifying as like, well, it's the way life is. It's kind of like I'll figure it out. And so when I got to the 10th paper in a row like this, I just sort of shoved the papers away and I began actually praying. And the prayer was, it's like, God, what is going on with these young people? It's like, it didn't used to be like this. Why are none of them identifying with the Christian faith that they grew up in? And I had this real image appear of the Good Samaritan story. And it's like, okay, I'm not sure what that means. And so then really I just sensed a voice that I believe was from God telling me, um, you're leaving them bleeding on the side of the road. And which is honestly not the thing you ever wanna hear in prayer, I'm gonna tell you. But, I was kind of stunned, and it's like, "Well, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm teaching theology, I have this open door policy, I give them feedback on these papers, I keep telling them about things going on in our campus ministry, et cetera, et cetera." It's like, I'm not leaving them bleeding by the side of the road, but I honestly don't understand why they cannot pick themselves up from where they're sitting in my classroom and walk about 500 feet or so, 500 yards perhaps, to the chapel that's in the center of our campus and take their problems to you there. I mean, it's right there. And once again, really had this sense from the Lord telling me it's like they are far too wounded to get there on their own. And when I heard that, it really stopped me in my tracks because I thought, that's exactly right. That's what they've been telling me for years at this point. They've been articulating their woundedness with great honesty, um, but unable to connect that dot, honestly, from their woundedness to Christ the healer. And so I sat with that for a while, and the short version of it is after this is like within days, it's like, okay, what they need more than me teaching them theology is evangelization. So the Lord's calling me to move into evangelization. And I didn't quite know how that was going to happen exactly. So, I mean, it was really kind of all new to me. It's like, okay, what's next then, Lord? And what was next was that my diocese, the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, um, the vicar general at the time called me. It's like, Susan, this may be a crazy question, but would you ever be interested in becoming the director of missionary discipleship for our diocese? And I mean, held on to the phone and just like, wow. um, it's like, yeah, actually, I would. And he went, seriously?
Prayers asked, prayers answered.
Exactly. It's like, well, you don't know what's been going on in my prayer and in my life in the past few weeks. So that's what happened. I left my position as a college professor and worked for the diocese in missionary discipleship. And the whole charge of that was really to try to help parishes become evangelizing parishes. And I did that for 6 years and really enjoyed it and learned a lot and loved the people, but really discerned that what I loved the most about that work was actually working one on one with the parishes. And that was about 50% of my job, not 100% of my job. So I moved into this nonprofit world of really consulting and working with parishes one on one so that it'll become 100% of what I do. So there's the story. That's the evangelization. But also, I was baptized and it started there. It just took me a while to sort of recognize that my baptismal call was meant to be answered in that particular way.
One thing that you mentioned, and I remember reading this from your book, The Four Ways Forward, was the sentimentality that some of these younger people were having in college. And you quoted someone as saying, I don't know if God exists, and I don't care to know either. How does that sentimentality show the importance that we need to be evangelizing today and the importance of it, especially for these younger people?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to teach people the right doctrines, the right information, the right facts in some cases, the history, all of that. It's another game entirely to try to draw people to care. I'm not gonna lie, it's like I know, this is from one of my other, colleagues in the theology department. She had said at one point, it's like, "I feel like I'm a lot more in sales than I am in education." Uh, as in trying to sell the Christian faith to students who, were really it's like, "Why should I want to buy this?" I don't really like the purchasing language much at all, but, I mean, it was a joke, and I got it, and everybody at our table got it too. It's like, we have to do so much to try to convince young people. It's kind of actually, you may find this a lot more fascinating than you realize. This may be a lot more relevant to you than you realize. You say you don't care, but don't let that be the last word. Let me tempt you with this. And that is actually a kind of evangelization. It's really pre evangelization more than anything else. It's really tempting people to curiosity and to openness to move from their position as kind, well, I don't really believe God exists. And at the heart of it, I don't care. It's like, I'll bet you actually do care, but I need to convince you why you do. I need to uncover that for you through time and relationship and a lot of work of the Holy Spirit, to be honest.
I think that's a really tough task to get people to care because you don't want to come off as overbearing. But I think you hit it on the nose with this assumption where I care a lot more about this than you probably care to hear in a lot of different situations. And when it comes to the subject of God, Catholicism, the existence of God, those are kind of touchy subjects. And I think people who don't care actually kind of care a lot, but in the inverse. You can mention something to them, but they are a little short and very closed off.
Yeah. No, and I think, the way that you can't make anybody care. Let me put it that way. You cannot make someone care. I mean, that is an act of the will in the end, for the other person. which is why you need to lead them to discover that they already care, right? And that's not a short task. It's one that's really built on relationship, it's built on trust, and it's usually a piece at a time. But it really needs to be a discovery process where you're accompanying that person and you're discovering together um, how God is relevant in that person's life. And you do that through, just having conversations that mean something, honestly, right? Being willing to go deep, being willing to hear where that person is coming from, to really listen, frankly. Uh, Deep listening usually will do the discovery for you. You don't need to go digging, and you probably shouldn't, right? You don't know where you're digging, so it could be a little dicey there. But if you allow the person to answer some meaningful questions, usually that will reveal some of the care that they didn't realize they had.
You talked about evangelizing parishes, which seem more like systems that are kind of going out and trying to find people to share the good news to. What is the difference between that and communicating with fallen away family members, best friends, people who you have a really strong relationship with to one on one? So, what is the distinction between those and the pros and cons of each?
Okay, that's a really good question and a really good distinction between parishes really almost function as systems. It is an organic group of people. And usually, when you're in leadership in a parish, you're a pastor, or perhaps you're on a parish staff, you are thinking in terms of the whole, right? But for so many of us, we're also thinking in terms of the individual. Yes, it's like about the individual relationship to a family member or to a friend or a work colleague, what have you. Um, the thing that joins both of those together is the fact that we're working through a baptismal grace. Okay. Um, one of the graces of baptism really is this call to evangelize. It's not an ordination call, it's not a specific call to a rather select number of people. It actually comes with baptism. So that means that every parish has an army that doesn't realize that it's already been equipped to be, the evangelists of that town. Yes? Okay. So one of the ways that parishes can help uh, individuals live according to the call of their baptism is honestly to challenge them and encourage them to reach out to family members who have drifted away from the Catholic Church. Yeah, it's a really common situation, and this is a Catholic rural life podcast, right? I mean, one of the things that when I talk to rural parishes, like, well, how are we going to reach out? We don't have a lot of new people move into this town. It's like, but I'll bet you have family members who have drifted away from the
Mhm.
parish, even if they don't live in town anymore. You're still in relationship, so the parish can support each individual in his or her call to evangelize, to to be a person of invitation, honestly, to be that link to continuing to practice the Catholic faith or coming back to the Catholic faith. Um, that's one thing that parishes can do. The other thing that parishes can do is that they can really build up leaders within their communities to think through. It's like, we've assumed that there isn't anybody to really do outreach to here in terms of sharing the good news, of inviting to Mass, considering Christ. Um, Maybe that's not true. Maybe we need to look at this with fresh eyes because often there are people there. There really are. There are new people in town. There may be a new immigrant community that parish has never done outreach to, honestly. Um, there's usually people, right? There
Mhm.
really are. So parishes can really support some people in leadership to go out and be the charge on this because honestly, although pastors do not um, escape the call to evangelize because they've been baptized too, they are not actually the primary evangelist for their parish. They were never meant to be. It's really the people of God who are in the pew who are the primary evangelists of the parish. So the parish exists to really encourage and equip and model what evangelization looks like in their particular community and in this particular cultural context, which is really pretty different from the one that we had only 20, 30 years ago.
You've mentioned a couple of times here the baptismal call. Can you break that down? What do you mean by that? What do you mean we're called to evangelize because of our baptisms?
Gosh, well, I don't have the materials in front of me on this, but I'm pretty sure if you look it up in the catechism, it's right there. It's just not something that we've paid as much attention to as perhaps we should have in the past, few decades. The United States really arose as a nation that welcomed Catholic immigrants. Not perfectly, to be sure, but
Mhm.
did welcome them to the shores. And they grew up here. We grew up here. I'm the daughter of immigrants from like two or three generations back. And there really wasn't a focus on evangelizing. There was no focus on supporting Catholics that were in a culture that was number one, new to them, that often spoke a different language and sometimes was hostile to them, you know? And that was a lot in and of itself. So the focus on evangelizing just wasn't there. It wasn't job one, honestly, in the 1800s, although there were exceptions that were out there, no question about it. But now, I mean, although we do still have a lot of immigration of Catholics, particularly from Mexico and Central America into the United States, so some of that reality still exists. We are often talking about parishes that are full of the baptized that are no longer living the fully immigrant reality, right? They have acclimated to the culture of the United States just fine. They speak English, okay, and their roots to the old country are a good two generations, if not three or four deep at this
Mhm.
point. So they are culturally Americans, honestly, at this point. And that means it's high time, to be perfectly honest, to get back to what really is the call to evangelize. I keep going back to the Great Commission, and the Great Commission is really Jesus' last words to the apostles and those gathered as he's ascending. I mean, as he's ascending. Um, Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. And they're very consoling words, but they're also very challenging words. But we always remember the last words of the people that we love, right? We
Mhm.
always do. They really do almost always have a missional quality to them. It really shouldn't be any different with Jesus Christ. Right? It's not like that was the first time that he popped evangelization language on them. But it's like, if you remember nothing else, people, as I am ascending to the Father, go and make disciples of all nations, right? It's really key. And within our Catholic theology, it's understood to be a grace that we receive with baptism. So we can't say that we're not called to evangelization. If you're baptized, you're called to evangelization, just period, full stop. Doesn't mean you're going to be comfortable with it. It just means that you're called to it. And if you're called, you're equipped. And you're never comfortable doing something for the first time. So we kind of need to get over that piece. Uh, but we do have what we need because we've been baptized. And that's powerful to recognize that and to really own it.
The only reason why I ask is there's a lot more baptized Christians, and especially the United States, than who are actually practicing their faith and their religion. So I just wanted to see what that connection is, because I imagine if all of those people strengthen their relationship with God and then started to actively evangelize, we'd be looking at a much different world.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. I mean, now here's the thing about sacramental theology. It's like, you can receive a gift, but it can more or less be unwrapped. It doesn't mean that you don't have the gift. It doesn't mean that the sacrament wasn't licit and real. Um, but on the other hand, you do need to have a disposition to receive the fullness and all the graces of that sacrament in a way that it really comes out in the way that you live your life. And so with baptism, since so many of us were baptized before we had a say in the matter, right? Our parents spoke for us. We were baptized as infants. Uh, it means that we do need to open our disposition to the fullness of the graces of baptism in order for those graces to be unwrapped is just a good visual image. It's like to be unleashed, to really enable us with, you know, God's confidence. Let's put it that way, with God's confidence to step forward and to invite that person to come back to mass, or to invite that person to have a conversation over coffee about. It's kind of like, I know you're having a hard time, and I want to share with you what I do when I have a hard time. And if that works for you, that's awesome. And if it doesn't, we've had some great coffee together, and you share, that you pray.
Something I hear a lot of is parents and grandparents concerned about their children and grandchildren drifting away from the faith, who are already baptized because, the parents and grandparents took that responsibility upon themselves. What does evangelization look like in that regard? Even though you mentioned it kind of before, go get a bit of coffee. Is there anything more to that, or more advice you would give to bridge the gap of evangelizing fallen away Catholics?
Okay, so first off, stay in relationship. I mean, every moment of evangelization needs to be built on trust. And if you're not in relationship with that person, they have less reason to trust you. This is honestly really, really important. It's easy to overlook it, but it's the reason why the overwhelming majority of people who do move from not practicing the faith to practicing the faith, from no active relationship with Jesus Christ to an engaged relationship with Jesus Christ, these people um, just don't get there through a book. They just don't. Even people who love to read, it may be part of their conversion story, but it's not where it starts. I keep saying, over and over, if you've been involved in RCIA, now OCIA ministry at all, people will come. Usually there is a getting to know you piece. It's like, what drew you here today? And the first words are always, I had a friend, or I have a spouse, or my mom, or, it's something, right? It's like, it's always a person. So we need to remember the power of the personal in this. And nothing could be more personal than the family relationship, right? So even if that person is moved away and, is really into, I'm going to be an adult, I'm going to do it by myself, just maintain the relationship. Let them know that you are there for them, that you love them, that you care about them. And yeah, make that real. But then what do you do? Okay, what do you do? Um, First off, you pray. Okay. Uh, Praying for people who are in need of a path back to the church is really one of the most effective things that you can do. And it's what we're all called to do. The Eucharistic Revivals initiative that they launched at the Congress called Walk with One, I think articulates this very well. And it also says, like, you need to decide who you're going to walk with. Okay. Let's assume that you already know it's kind of you're a parent and you really want to walk with, in some way, your adult child who is no longer practicing the faith. Um, and then the next thing you do is you truly intercede for that person and are in a serious way, not just like occasionally, but like make a prayer practice and stick to it, right? Daily prayer for that person to know in a new way the fullness of Jesus Christ. Okay, to know in a new way the fullness of Jesus Christ and keep that up. And then when the time is right, and it'll probably be sooner than you think, to be honest, uh, introduce the conversation. I always recommend that a person is going to introduce the conversation. It's like, look, um, you're an adult, and I'm an adult. And even as a mother and a child, we have a different relationship now than we had 20 years ago. And it's beautiful. It's good. It's natural and it's right. But it means that I want to talk to you in a way that's different than when you were, 4 or 5 years old. And I was wondering if we can have coffee or go out or have a meal or something like that. Because I know that you're not practicing the faith anymore. And honestly, as two adults, I just I would like to hear why you've made that decision. It's like, and if you're willing, I would like to tell you more about why I stay, why I remain, right? Because it's very possible that you haven't had that type of conversation with that person. It just wasn't, it didn't feel quite appropriate when they were young. Maybe it didn't happen when they were teenagers. But, even if it goes nowhere, it's a way of really strengthening and deepening your relationship, right? If you handle it right. When the person does share with you, if they say yes to this, why they're no longer practicing, this is not the time to get judgmental. Okay. Judgment is not going to draw that person back to the faith. You are trying to win a soul, not an argument. So, you know, you just listen. You listen. And honestly, you may find out things that you didn't know before. I mean, that person may actually have a really um, challenging reason as why it's hard for that person to go back to church. So you need to receive that with compassion, okay? With compassion. But what happens next really depends on the situation. What you want to do is you want to invite that person back, right? You want to invite that person back, whether they are ready or not, just to extend the invitation, right? Uh, if they say yes, great, job done. Um, if they say no, or they're more likely to be kind of like, I'll think about it. Or you don't even quite know how they respond because they live far away, right? And you're not calling them on Sunday morning. It's like, hi, you home? Right?
I'm in your driveway,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to become the NSA on this, right? You've done honestly what you can on this point. I mean, the hard piece to recognize is there's a lot you can do, but there's only so much you can do. This really ends up being his or her decision and not yours. But you could do all of those things. And I also talk about often about it's like, you can do lots of things after that meaningful conversation to sort of leave breadcrumbs to come back home. And by coming back home, I mean like coming back home to the church, right? And breadcrumbs can look like it's like, hey, I know you talked about this. I found a cool article. Okay. Don't do this every day because then it's going to become a little overbearing. But every once in a while, they'll know. It's like, yeah, mom's trying to get me to do this. But on the other hand, if it's genuinely a topic they're interested in, they may open it up anyway, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Now you know a little bit more about what's going on here, whereas before you probably didn't. You just knew they weren't going. So you can leave all the breadcrumbs, and at that point, you really need to pray, hope, and don't worry. right? You need to live the words of Padre Pio there, and keep up the prayer, absolutely. Keep up the relationship, keep up the breadcrumbs, and you have to let it go at that point, which is really, really hard. But it's something that you should be fairly accustomed to as a parent because we have to learn to let go of our kids in lots of small ways as they grow into adulthood. And this is one of them. You have influence, you have real influence, but you cannot make it happen. So you pray and you hope for the best. And sometimes people will return right away. They just needed an invitation, frankly. And sometimes it takes years.
I want to switch gears to something that affects specifically rural communities, and that's the exodus from rural. There's a big push culturally to go to college, to go into the bigger cities. And I don't really know the numbers off the top of my head, but I can imagine during that transition, a lot of young adults lose their faith during that time, and parents have a harder time reaching them. And so I think prayer is a really good piece of advice because you're not in the same room. You might not even be, in the same state anymore. And parents can feel helpless, and just just going into your room and praying for them can, help you. But are there any specific prayers or any devotionals that you think are very helpful for this?
A lot of people will mention asking for St. Monica's intercession, which makes sense. If you know the story of St. Monica, she's the mother of St. Augustine. And she was a Christian well before Augustine was, and she desperately wanted her son Augustine to um, become a Christian and join the faith. And this was back in 300s, honestly, right? So it was not normal. I'll put it that way. And Monica's husband, in fact, was not a Christian until his deathbed, where he received baptism and received Christ. Uh, but Monica was a prayer warrior. She just was. And she was in constant relationship with Augustine, sometimes to his great dismay. Like Augustine moves from Northern Africa to Italy, um, primarily for job opportunities. But Monica's like, yeah, I think I'm going to follow you. Okay. I'm not necessarily recommending that piece, but
Dr. Susan says, follow your kids to college and
you know what? You
take
can
them to
follow your
coffee.
kids to Italy any day of the week. But I mean, someplace else, I'm not so sure. Um, but in any case, you've got to believe that Monica has a special heart and a special knowledge for parents who are struggling and even in pain with with their own children not adopting the faith or falling away from the faith. So I do think she's a powerful intercessor in this regard. Beyond the devotions, I would say probably the most important part of this is to really call upon the power of the Holy Spirit to give you an expectant faith on this. And by that, I mean really to pray in hope rather than praying in abject pleading. God's going to hear both, and God understands everything. It's where you're coming from. But the Lord does give us the power to live in hope. And I think honors that in a particular way, is kind of, Lord, it's kind of, I am living in the expectant faith that you are turning my daughter's heart around. And I thank you for what you are doing in her life, even though I do not see it and she is not reporting it to me. Um, and I ask you to continue to pour your love and your own spirit into her life in a way that she will come to a decision point. And yeah, that kind of prayer. It's like people who love Therese de Lisieux is kind. She had that kind of expectant faith. She would say, "I'm going to pray out of uh, my positivity, what I believe rather than what I feel. So don't let your feelings of worry or even despair um, be the front of your prayer. This is an act of the will. You don't need to feel it. Okay. It's kind of like, Lord, I know you love my daughter more than I do myself. I know you are working in her life. I pray that you continue to do that and open her heart in a way that she's going to be able to hear that you are good and um, that she has a place back home, which is ultimately with you, right? So I think that's important. I think that's important. Whatever devotion is one you especially love is a good one, honestly. But to really pray and hope and maybe make Saint Monica one of your best friends.
You mentioned evangelizing parishes before. What needs to happen and what is like currently happening in a parish that you would classify it as an evangelizing parish?
Oh boy. Well, that's a big question. um, I guess the short version of this, and I do hate to say this, but the short version of this is most parishes aren't, right? Most parishes aren't. So, on one hand, it does mean introducing a new set of values and a new kind of culture into your parish, but it's not one that's foreign to the Christian tradition, and it's not one that we're unable to adopt. It does mean that when we're talking about a cultural shift within a parish, that it takes intentionality and it takes work, and it takes looking at structures and sort of looking at, it's like, is what we're doing here in this parish really angled towards maintaining the people that we do have? Or is it really angled towards being on mission to people outside of the walls? Um, Most parishes are going to fall in the maintenance camp. They're going to see, especially leadership, the role that they have as being one of offering sacramental and pastoral care to the initiated. And absolutely, that's part of it. I'm not saying ditch that. I'm just saying balance it out. Okay, balance it out. Yes, do that, but also, remind people on a very regular basis so that they cannot forget it, that the purpose of every parish is to be the evangelical lighthouse of that given community. Okay. So people should be able to see from the outside, it's like those people are believers and they live in hope and they help the poor and they are welcoming. And I feel like I can go in. Now, if you can't say yes to those things, if that's not observable from the outside, then it's really not an evangelizing parish. But like I said, most struggle in this. Lots of parishes are going to say, it's like, oh, well, evangelization is something the Protestants do. Well, it is something the Protestants do, but I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't. If anything, there's more reason that we should,
Mhm.
because they're getting it from scripture and we share that common scripture, right? I mean, there is nothing about evangelization that is anti Catholic. It is part of our tradition that we need to recover and implement in a fresh way in what's increasingly a secular culture, a culture that is not always overtly hostile to the Christian faith, but it is, the values are different. I'll put it that way. The values are different. So maybe that's one way to begin answering your question. It does involve. I love that you brought up the piece systems. It does involve looking at systems and looking at structures and seeing how those systems and structures support or don't support the value of being on mission to the town or the county that surrounds that particular parish.
How important do you think it is for rural parishes to not necessarily host events, but be outwardly Catholic and have some sort of culture, like a Catholic culture, instead of just being, just having a building in a church? I know we have a few parishes and dioceses with CRL chapters that have actually taken the torch and they start going to county fairs. They're starting to get booths. They set it up so they can hear confessions and give blessings at the county fair. How important is it for evangelizing parishes to participate and host events that aren't necessarily just Catholic events?
Right. I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, depending on where you are in the United States, okay,
Mhm.
there's there is still a lot of anti-Catholic hostility in some Protestant churches. I mean, I grew up in the South of the United States. It's definitely how I grew up. It's less the case now, but it still does exist. Okay. So if you're not out in the community, if you're not visible, if you're not seen at the county fair and so forth, you are basically letting those communions win their own argument, their own very false argument, frankly, that Catholics are not Christian or they worship Mary or that sort of thing, right? If you're not there and able to be seen and engaged, how are these people going to know? They're not, right? They're simply not. So it's important. It's important to be out there. I would say I really encourage parishes across the board to really think in terms of some of the categories that come from the Directory of Catechesis. It comes from the Vatican, in that parishes are called to really engage in the work of pre-evangelization, of evangelization, of catechesis and discipleship, and of apostolic work or mission, right? Just if you take those four categories, that's a relatively simple way of thinking about, okay, pre-evangelization, we need to be out in the community. We need to be friends with the community, right? We need to be serving the greater needs of the community, right? That's pre-evangelization. It's a lot of trust building that we talked about earlier. Okay. Evangelization is actually the communication of the message, the invitation to come and see. Yes. Which sometimes we sort of assume that people, uh, they know where to find us if they're ready to come and see. It's like, no, we've got to make it easier for people than that. Okay. They're
Mhm.
not just walking in the door anymore. Um, we need to find ways to communicate that outside of the walls. And yeah, I mean, confessions at the county fair. I mean, even if somebody is not Catholic and so they're not going to receive sacramental confession, it does create a great Q&A opportunity. It's like, so what is this about? What do you believe? Why can't you just, confess your sins to God? Why does a priest need to be there? And that's great, honestly, because those are curiosity questions. Those are curiosity questions that can lead to openness. And it's really important. All right. So find ways to get the message out there. Don't be shy about what you believe and living it. Catechesis and discipleship is really for the initiated. That's really to strengthen the people who have been baptized to continue to unpack the gifts of that baptism and receiving the Eucharist and their confirmation and grow, because we are meant to grow as disciples. Eternally, we are always meant to be growing. The body withers, the spirit is not meant to, but you do need to feed it. And that's really what catechesis is. That's what discipleship is too. Not just learning about the faith, but living it too. Okay, so building on that constantly, well beyond age 18 and graduation from wherever it is you're graduating. And finally, the apostolic work section of this, it's like that can absolutely be evangelization, and it should be. Um, just thinking about how do we really share the word of God with the wider community, particularly to people who have not heard it before. But it's also the mission to the poor and the vulnerable. Okay. And those are two separate missions. But when you serve the poor and the vulnerable, and we do this because Jesus told us to, honestly, Jesus always had a particular compassion for the poor and the vulnerable. We're called to recognize them as brothers and sisters. While we're not ever going to make this a quid pro quo situation where it's kind of like, I'm going to give you food if you believe in Jesus Christ, right? No, I'm going to give you food But you don't need to hide why you're giving that person food. You don't need to hide your why. You just need to not use that as an evangelization tool. You're being a witness. You're not being, um, you're not trying to create some kind of spiritual transaction here, right? So I think if parishes do that, um, they're going to actually go a long way towards balancing out this inclination towards pastoral care and sacramental care of the initiated who are already attending their parish, and the mission, the greater mission, to be that evangelical lighthouse, right, to the county. So whatever the parish decides to do, putting it in those categories is a relatively simple way to balance things out. And it's like, okay, we are covering the call. Yeah. We're always working harder at it and figuring out, are there ways to do this better? Is there a population that we're missing? But you need to begin somewhere, and that's a good place to begin.
What would you advise? So, in the context of rural
Uh-huh.
parishes don't have the staff that some
Right.
like suburban urban parishes have. What would you recommend to someone who's just a parishioner, and they really want to focus their effort and time on turning their parish into an evangelizing parish? What steps do you think, like, would you recommend that they take? Um, and how would they communicate this with the pastor?
Right. To create an evangelizing parish. Yeah, you absolutely should reach out to your pastor and say, it's like, I really want to help with this. Is there a way I can do this? And maybe not just look to the pastor to give you something to do, although he may have something very specific. He's like, I've been waiting for somebody to step up. It's like, would you be willing to do this? I mean, he may, but on the other hand, he may not. I mean, the pastor may be very much in a situation. It's like, I don't quite know how to even get this going. So if you're willing to step into, a humble leadership role, and I say humble by it's like you may not know what this is going to look like, but you're willing to lead if that's what the parish needs and what God wants. Um, Share that, okay? Say it's like I'd be willing to be one of the people who would lead the charge on this, okay? And if your pastor doesn't get back to you on this in a substantial way in 2 to 4 weeks, I would remind him again, just simply because pastors are really busy. It doesn't mean that he's not interested, but your persistence by just bringing it up one more time, I think is important. It's like, oh, he's serious. She's serious. Okay. She really wants to do this. So that's important too. Um, what can you do? Okay. Well, number one, I think really the most effective way that you can really become an evangelizing parish, first thing is to really get a strong small group ministry going in your parish. You need to get people talking to each other. And on one hand, rural parishes often have a real leg up on this in terms of the big parishes with lots of staff and all that, because going to one of these big parishes can feel very anonymous, honestly. And that's less commonly the case with our rural parishes. But I went to a rural parish growing up. I mean, technically, I still go to one now in a small town. I know that you could be around people that you've known your entire life and not have a really deep conversation with that person. So the small groups allow you to go deeper, right? It deepens the relationships of the people who exist inside that church. And if you're thinking that doesn't sound like evangelization, you're right, it doesn't. But if those small groups are actually angled towards making people more comfortable with the practice of evangelization, I mean, they're going to know the people that they're called to share, to invite back. Um, those small groups have done the work of evangelization, right? They're both building up the body of Christ and they're empowering the body of Christ to go out and invite people to come and see, right? So that's one way. So it was starting a small group process, and there are a number of them out there. Uh, Starting a small group process is, I think, pretty key, honestly, and really changes the temperature of a parish in a significant way. I would say also working on hospitality is a big part of becoming a welcoming parish, because you can invite people to come and see, but if they more or less get the cold shoulder at the door, uh, it's no good, right? People like the natural touches of being welcomed. Um, Lots of rural parishes can fall into a trap of, it's kind of, well, we know everybody here. We're comfortable with everybody here. I'm going to go ahead and talk to the friends that I see every week, but not so much people who are new and just walking in. They might even be seen as a little bit suspect, like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, I'm from rural Wisconsin, and I travel into northern Minnesota up to a family cabin. And I tend to go around and attend these rural parishes, and it's quite common that after Mass, people sitting near me will ask where I'm from. They'll ask what brings you here. These parishes are very welcoming and close knit.
Right, right. So it's actually kind of obvious. So that's actually a leg up that many rural parishes have on the larger parishes, right? I mean, I could say until I'm blue in the face, like, oh, you really need to make a personal connection with people who come in who are new. And it doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be, it's kind of like, hey, it's great to see you. It's like, are you new here? Are you visiting? That sort of thing. I mean, just help people know that they are noticed. But that can be really hard in a large parish. It's kind of like, I'm not sure if this person's new or not. I mean, there's like, 500 people here, and I don't know. It's worth the risk, by the way, if you do go to a larger parish. It's just like the worst thing that'll happen is like, "Oh, actually, I've been here for 2 years." It's like, "Oh, silly me." Oh, well. But the smaller parishes, it's usually pretty obvious.
Mhm.
So, being welcoming from the very beginning, actually, when somebody's walking in, is great. Training ushers or hospitality ministers to not just hand out the books, but to smile, to say, "Hi, we're glad you're here," and particularly to notice if somebody is new. It's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, are you new here?" It's kinda like, if you are, I can sort of orient you to the church, or something like that. It's like, "Is there anything in particular that you need?" "Would you like to know where the bathrooms are?" Just something little, so they know it's like, "Yeah, we're wanted here." Right. So becoming a hospitable parish is important. I mean, hospitality really refers to generosity to the stranger. It's not just about being nice. So if you think of it that way, it's kind of, how are we generous to the stranger who shows up at Mass? How are we generous to the stranger who lives in town, but is not going to our Mass? Maybe because he's never been invited to go to a church before. Right. Right. So that's hospitality. So working on that goes a long way as well.
Love rural life and want to see the faith flourish in the countryside? Join Catholic Rural Life today. As a member, you'll support vital advocacy, faith formation, and community building for rural Catholics. Plus, you'll get exclusive resources such as our quarterly magazine. Visit CatholicRuralLife.org to become a member today. Together, we can cultivate the faith in rural America. We were talking about things people can do in parishes and how to get started in evangelizing. You mentioned small groups, but is there a basic toolbox for someone who wants to get started in evangelizing? What are some of those tools? What do they look like that can really help someone get started?
There's no lack, honestly, of resources out there right now. We actually have more written and digital resources on evangelization in the United States, Catholic evangelization, than we have ever had, period. So the problem is actually almost that there's too much and you don't know what you're looking at. All these things are not like the other, right? Some of them are really angled toward one particular population, and others another. So a handy dandy toolbox if you had a first aid kit for evangelists. First off, I will share this. Like, I think that the training that is offered by St. Paul Street Evangelization is extremely good. And if you are listening to this and you live in a rural area, you may think exactly like I did. It's like, well, this sounds like a great ministry, but I don't live in Detroit where they're headquartered, right? It sounds very urban. When you have that word street in there, it does, right? However, number one, I've seen this work actually really well in a rural context. I've actually participated in it working rather well in a rural context, like at the county fair that you mentioned earlier, or at a farmer's market, or at a local parade. So there are different ways to make it work. But honestly, I mean, when I say their training is good, and it's available online too, I mean, you could bring them in or you can do this online. They do it every couple months or so. They really do a great job training people to get more confident in being non-confrontational, but offering a conversation, a rosary, a miraculous medal, a crucifix to somebody, and then just having that conversation about, where they're at in their faith. It's really led by the other person, right? So you don't feel like you should have a script, but they do make you prepared to say a few things in a way that, you just may not be prepared through any other piece of your life to do. Like they have this kind, can I give you one good reason why I'm a Catholic? And usually a person will say, sure. They're not going to say no. But if they say no, it's like, all right, have a great day. God bless you. No, they're probably going to say, sure, why not? And then you give your one good reason. And your one good reason is usually not completely rooted in giving them a little theology lecture right then. It's usually giving them, look, when I was at this point in my life, I turned to God in prayer here, and this is what happened, and this is how my life is different now, right? You're embedding the salvation of Jesus in a bite-sized story that is true and it's honest. And then this training actually teaches you, or really gives you the space to figure out what that story is, because you may not realize it's like, I don't have a story like that. Oh, you do. You do. You may not have thought of it that way, but you really do. So they give some examples, and it's like, oh, well, that is kind of like, I mean, just to give you an example of how simple this can be, so it's not overwhelming. This is what I love about St. Paul Street. They make it very simple. They make it very simple. When I am doing this with them, one of the things that we do outside of a hospital in a public park is we hand out rosaries, or we offer it to people. It's kind of like, would you like a rosary? People will often say yes, because they're usually at the hospital because there's problems, right? There's physical problems going on. And it's like, did you know the rosary is a prayer? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it's like, we have a little handout. It's like, yeah, I mean, if you ever wanted to use this as a form of prayer, here's how you do it. And usually at that time I share, it's like, when I was in my 20s, I was having this horrible time sleeping. It's like I could not sleep. I had insomnia all the time. I was pretty stressed about a number of things, but I just really didn't know what was going on. And at that point in my life, I began praying a rosary every night before I went to bed. And sure, I mean, it is very repetitive, right? And it is a way to sort of calm down. But I'm telling you, I felt something more than that. And I really believe that it healed me of my inability to fall asleep. And it's like, it was no small thing, I was able to stay awake like the entire day. It was great. My employer really liked it. Make a little joke about it. It's fine. But honestly, my prayer to Jesus through Mary made a difference in my life there. It's like, Okay, this is not even the biggest story that I have to share, honestly, about how God has worked in my life, but it's a very digestible story, and it's true. It's absolutely true. So it causes people to think, it's like, sometimes I have problems falling asleep. There you
Mm.
go. Hang on to this. You never know, right? So anyway, I would really recommend doing that training. That's they kind of provide the toolbox, I would say, for
Mhm.
any person who's in relationship to somebody else, whether it's on the street or in your family or in your parish or in your workplace, to have a conversation where Jesus is introduced as a solution to a problem that somebody has.
You mentioned handing out rosaries. Is it important to be well catechized in order to evangelize? It's not like you're out there to start an argument or do apologetics, but I can't help but feel concerned that if you are handing out rosaries, someone could come up to you and say, "That's Mary worship. That's just repetitive prayer." So, could not being able to answer someone's questions hinder your ability to evangelize?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it is, right? I mean, the better your catechesis is, the better your education is in what you believe, um, the more nimble you are, I would say,
Mm.
as an evangelist, the more capable you are to answering questions on the spot. So it's good. But on the other hand, I would not let a lack of catechesis stop you from sharing the gospel. I mean, honestly, if you look at what happens in the gospels, people are sharing the gospel under Jesus's tutelage. They don't know everything.
Mm.
He knows that. He sends them out anyway. It's like you share the bread that you've received, right? And if somebody asks you a question that you can't answer, you could say, I know there's an answer to that question, but to be honest, I don't have it, you know, in my head this very moment. It's like, usually most questions like that could be answered in the catechism.
Mm.
So you could say, it's like, there's this website with the catechism. It's like St. Charles Borromeo Church, Catechism, Catholic Church. You put that in Google, you put in a couple of those words, you'll find the argument.
Mhm.
I mean, give them something, especially if it's somebody who you're not going to see again. If it is somebody that you're going to see again, find the answer and give that to the person,
Mm. Okay.
right? But to be honest, I completely hear what you're saying, but I also see way too many people say, I'm just not prepared. It's like, well, you have two responses to that: either get prepared or do it anyway, or both,
Mhm.
right? And honestly, my own work doing that particular type of evangelization where you're really just encountering people who are on the street or having these random conversations, they're not usually going for the apologetics route.
Yep.
There's a place for apologetics in the Catholic Church. Absolutely, there is. But they're usually not going for the apologetics route. They're usually much more attracted to an experience you've had that you want to share with them and say they could have that experience too,
Mhm.
right? They have time to get the catechesis, but the experience tends to be what's attractive and also something that all of us can share. If we've had any experience of the Lord Jesus, um, we can share that with somebody else. It's kind of like, when I'm stressed, I'm able to pray. And more often than not, I really receive this peace that seems to come from beyond me. And I believe that that is God.
You hit something there with being over prepared, and you have to start practicing and not going all in on them with citations and quotes. You gotta be able to practice humility because you might have the answers, but that's not really what you're there for.
Right. Well, and actually, I mean, honestly, sometimes when people do come up to you, and this is pretty rare, honestly, but when people do come up to you, it's like, well, what about, you know, isn't this really worshiping Mary? What about? It's like they're angling for a fight. And I would basically argue, don't give it to them. Don't give it to them. Um, now if this is a person with whom you're friends with and you've have a trusting relationship with that person, okay, then you can have a discussion, not a fight. uh, have the discussion, but if it's somebody you've never met before or you barely know, um, I would resist the urge to take the bait
Hmm.
because it's bait. It's not an honest question.
Let's go back to parishes, especially rural parishes. What are some distinct pros and cons of rural parishes that they have when it comes to evangelization? What are some of the difficulties that they're going to face, and how do they overcome those?
Oh, some of the difficulties, honestly, the biggest difficulty that I encounter with rural parishes, becoming evangelizing parishes is a mindset. It's like, this is not for us. This is for the parishes in the big cities. This is for the suburban parishes. Um, One concrete expression of that is we don't have the staff for that,
Hmm.
right? Lots of rural parishes have very limited staff beyond the pastor. Some of them have none other than like a half-time bookkeeper, right? Okay. Um, that's not actually a problem. It's a difference, but it's not a problem, because evangelization is honestly very grassroots and organic, or at least it can be. When it's program driven, it tends to end when the program ends. But if you build it into the people of God as a lifestyle, it never ends, right? So you might almost say that rural parishes have a real advantage in that regard because they can't program themselves as easily. They don't have a staff person to run a program as easily. Uh, to become an evangelizing parish, but they can build each other up to become more confident in sharing the gospel, in being hospitable, in being out in the community, and being witnesses to the faith. Right? Okay. Um, some of the other challenges that rural parishes may have. Um, Often rural parishes are clustered. At least that's what they call them in my diocese. Other dioceses call them like a family of parishes.
Mhm.
But I mean, basically, it means you have three or four and sometimes more parishes where they are served by one priest who is the pastor. And for many of those parishes, that pastor is not in residence. And that may be a fairly new reality to these parishes. Uh, and it's a difficult one, right? It's a huge transition. It's a huge transition. What it does mean is that evangelization needs to be recognized as being really owned by the baptized, right? That it's really a call for parishes that are in clusters for the lay people to step up even more than they have in the past. It's like, okay, we cannot um, obviously celebrate the liturgy, okay, of the mass. We cannot be the source of the sacraments, but we can absolutely be the feet of the mission,
Mhm.
right? The feet of the mission outside of our parish, and in fact, most appropriately, they are. So, finding ways for clusters and rural parishes to do that, not to act on their own, they still have a pastor, but to act even more independently of their pastor with his permission than perhaps they did 10 years ago when they had a pastor in residence. That's a challenge, right? That's a new reality for lots of places, but it is doable. Okay, it's a new thing, but it's not an undoable thing. Um, those are some of I mean, maybe there are others. Do you have ideas about challenges that you find in rural parishes around evangelization?
I would say parishes closing down. That is probably one of the biggest ones we hear about because it really shakes a community. Their community was their parish, and now they have to go drive 10 minutes away to the next parish. Their community is no longer just the people that attended their parish. Now it's them and the other parish, so they have to meet a whole new pre-existing community. But parish closures really wound people, and I think having a good evangelizing parish trains them and can help fix some of the problems of acclimation and transition.
No, that's a really, really good point. First off, completely agree with you that whenever a parish closes, um, it's wounding. There's no way that it cannot be. There's a real critical loss there that is just hard to bear. Um, but I also agree with you that the more that parishes are trained in a missionary discipleship, honestly, of thinking of their lives as mission and being bigger than the particular physical parish building that so many generations grew up within and loved, that is the solution, honestly. That is the way forward for people who live in a community um, where the parish building has closed. The other thing that these clusters can do when this happens, and I know some have done this more successfully than others, it's not easy, is to find a way to really continue to honor the distinctiveness and the gifts of that parish community that was closed in their new spot. I mean, on one hand, you want people to grow to love each other, all within that parish. You don't want parish A and parish B happening to be in the same building, right? I mean that's problematic in the long run. But on the other hand, honoring the history, honestly, and the relationships and the gifts of the parish that had to close is really important. Um, yeah, just because the parish closed doesn't mean that the gifts went away. They just got transferred, and they need to find a way to keep them real and alive within that community that now has a closed parish building.
As you mentioned before, the importance of hospitality, having the hospitality mentality in the parish that didn't close down, you have to welcome all these people and be empathetic and prepared to invite them in.
Right. Yeah,
another
I've been in the parish. I am in the parish right now that welcomed community that had where the parish building had to close. And I was sitting with one of the women of that previous community, and it's not terribly far away, honestly. But she and the others there were sad just because it was a very, very, very close knit community. It was small, but everybody knew each other. They had each other's back. And the parish that I attend is, significantly larger than theirs was. It's still not huge, but it's definitely larger. Um, but she's like, well, then I instead it's like, well, is there anything that we could be doing to make it easier? And it's just kind of like, honestly, no. It's like people have been so welcoming. And it's kind of like, the it is a little bit like grieving a death, to be honest. But you can't erase that, and it's not your fault. You're not to blame for it. It's kind of like just being so very welcoming to us every step of the journey has meant a lot. Has meant a lot. And so now I can actually see the positive things about being a member at this parish. It's like, oh, well, my previous parish, we weren't really big enough to pull off um, doing a parish festival, for example. It's like, but you all have a really big one, and it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it, and so things like that. Hospitality does make a huge difference, absolutely.
The grieving of a loss is very real when it comes to parish closures because they usually have deep-rooted history where it's generational. You're at the same parish that your grandparents, great-grandparents attended.
And the cemetery is usually right outside there. Exactly. No, I get it. I get it. It's really hard.
Another problem that I see in rural is the population leaving the rural communities for bigger cities. Generally, this is with the younger generation. So parents raise their families, and then the children that would replace them just leave. I don't know how evangelization could fix that.
Yeah, I think the whole depopulation issue really depends so much on the particular place where it's happening. It's there. I think there are possibilities even within depopulating um, parishes, but in the end, all you can do is be the strongest, healthiest, um, most mission-oriented parish that you can be with the people that you have. I would say one thing for parishes that are in areas that are depopulating, if they are areas, rural areas where there are immigrants there, and there hasn't been a deliberate welcome to those immigrants, even if they're only there, if they're temporary workers, for example, agricultural workers for like 4 to 6 months or so. Um, Absolutely, that's an evangelical imperative, I would say. And you might say it's like, well, but there's this other parish that's a little further away that actually offers, Spanish language masses or something like that. It's like, well, they may well find a home there, but I would still argue that there's room for outreach, right? For the people who are closest to your parish, they need to know that they are welcome. And it could be the smallest things, honestly, as long as they know about them. It's obviously a welcome. It's obviously things like trying to find some way to speak the language. And honestly, we've got so many tools now, and they're not perfect. But I mean, if you're in a community where nobody really knows Spanish, and to be candid, I find that a little hard to believe because, I mean, they may not have great Spanish, but they probably know some Spanish if they're working with these people on the farm, right? They know at least some basics. You can make the invitation and the welcome. People will come and realize it's like, oh, it's not in Spanish, but you're still doing what you can, honestly, with what you have, right? A statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, I have found goes a long way
Oh, yeah,
because
definitely.
the devotion is so strong with people from Mexico, but also from the rest of Central America. It's a sign, it's a physical sign. It's like, you are welcome here. You don't need to put "you are welcome here" in Spanish, although you certainly could. You put a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe in front of the parish, and that really says something. So, things like that. I mean, I really encourage parishes to think outside the box, honestly, and not just say it's like, oh, we're depopulating. What can we do? It's like, well, take a deep breath and really look. Really look. Are there opportunities that we are just overlooking right now? And if there aren't, well, then they aren't. You just be the most mission forward, deeply devout parish that you can be. You work with the people um, who have moved away but come back for Christmas and they come back for Easter, right? When kids go away to college, if that's part of your reality, you send them the packages on a regular basis from your parish. It's kind of like, hey, we hope it's going well. It's kind of remind them that they have a faith home, right? And they're always welcome back and welcome to continue practicing when they move away. So thinking like that. I also would say that parishes that are strong, that are in a place that's genuinely depopulated, they really may be called to practicing their evangelical call outside of their community. There are lots of opportunities to do this um, outside of the United States, certainly outside of our individual communities. You know, that may be thinking way outside the box for some people, but we're called to not keep our light under a bushel. It's kind of think about where the light can be shed and what your ability is to provide that light.
One thing I wanted to bring up is the project that you founded called the Mark 519 Project. So, firstly, why Mark 519?
Yeah, everybody asks that. It's like it's a real challenge to Catholics. Kind of scripture. It's like Mark 5:19. That's not John 3:16. I don't know. Okay, so this is the story of the Gerasene demoniac. Yeah, which puzzles people even more. But at this point in the story, the Gerasene demoniac has been healed by Jesus. Okay. And he's sitting there and he's in his right mind, and everybody is both afraid and amazed by what has just happened. Jesus has just cast all these legion of demons out of the man. And this man goes to Jesus and asks to follow him. And this is so common after healing stories in the Gospels that the response that a person has is kind of, I want to follow Jesus. I think there's a lesson in that. But this is one time where Jesus looks at this person and says, no. It's like, I have another job for you. So Mark 5:19 is go home to your own people and tell them what the Lord in his mercy has done for you. Okay, go home to your own people and tell them what the Lord in his mercy has done for you. And it's the first evangelical commission that you find in the Gospel of Mark. Yeah. And so this man goes back to the Decapolis. He's a pagan, for crying out loud. I mean, he's not even Jewish, but he goes back to the Decapolis and he tells everybody, and everybody sees it's kind of like, I was healed, right? I was that man who was like hitting myself with stones living out in the graveyard for years. I'm completely healed. There was this man, Jesus from Nazareth in Israel. Could he be the Messiah? So I love this particular passage because I think it really speaks to parish-based evangelization. Okay. We tend to overcomplicate evangelization. We need to be intentional about it, but the intentionality is basically doing exactly what Jesus says to this man, and that is go home to your people and tell them what the Lord has done for you, right? That's where evangelization starts. It's the most effective place usually to get people to listen, to hook people, let's say, to get people curious, and to give witness, right? So that's why Mark 5:19. We decided to name the entire apostolate after that particular verse.
So, what is the goal of the Mark 519 project?
The Mark 5:19 project really exists to help foster thriving and apostolic parishes. So most of our work, the heart of our work is on consulting with parishes, either short term or long term, to really help them become these evangelizing parishes, to really change the culture and reset the values, make the mission clear, and to equip people, particularly the baptized, to be evangelists in their own place and to their geographic boundaries of the parish. We also do some speaking and offer retreats because sometimes that's exactly what people need to, is a little more education about what evangelization is and is not. So that's what we do.
When working with the parishes, how distinct is one parish to another, especially in taking steps towards becoming an evangelization parish?
Yeah. I would argue that every parish is actually fairly distinct.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not that evangelization doesn't have a lot of common patterns to it. I wrote a book called The Four Ways Forward, where I try to sort of categorize these patterns of evangelization within parishes in the United States. So there are absolutely some commonalities and some patterns. But on the other hand, the mission field really is distinct for every single parish. And I would argue that the mission field is the geographic boundaries of that parish. So, I mean, are there commonalities? Sure. But really, part of becoming an evangelizing parish is trying to understand your mission field in a new way. It's like, how have people changed? What do people really believe within your town or your county or your particular neighborhood? Um, what does the demographic shift look like and so forth? It's like, because this is the people that we're called to share the gospel with. We can share the gospel beyond our geographic boundaries, and we should, but not at the expense of the people living in the geographic boundaries, because that's why parishes exist. They exist to be that beacon of the good news to those particular people, because if we don't share it with them, who will?
What is probably the number one biggest misconception about evangelization that you see when you first get to a parish?
The biggest misconception is that people think evangelization is forcing the faith on people, right? They really see it as being very intrusive and very confrontational. And that's sad. That's really tragic, because it just simply isn't that. I wasn't kidding at the beginning of the podcast. I'd mentioned to you, it's like, there's spiritual harassment and there's evangelization, and they're not the same. Right? Evangelization is lovingly sharing the message of Jesus Christ to someone who would benefit from hearing that, which would be, I would say, everyone. Evangelization really is an act of love. I think people don't understand that well enough. So a lot of the work that we do educationally in the Mark 519 project is trying to convince people of exactly that. It's kind of like, look, this is how you love people, and you do it in a loving manner, and you leave the results to God. But if you offer people good news that they need to hear, and you do so with compassion and genuine friendship, you will be amazed at how people will respond.
Where can people contact you, learn more about the Mark 519 project, and order The Four Ways Forward, which is a great book, by the way?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so the Mark 519 project, we're on the web. It's mark519project.org, or just plop Mark 519 project into Google. The Four Ways Forward, you can buy wherever books are sold, and that includes Amazon. So you can find me there.
Well, thank you for giving us your time, and hopefully we can discuss more in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks, Zach.